Rohit.
Hey, Joby.
How are you? A very warm welcome to the channel Kahani's Golden Bytes.
Thank you so much for having me over. It's a delight to get back in touch with you and be able to have this conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Lovely, Rohit. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. So, Rohit, for the benefit of our viewers, could you just give a little background about what you're doing, what you've done, just for the benefit of our viewers, Rohit?
Absolutely, Joby. Happy to. I've been an HR professional for around 20 years and have worked with several companies, both multinationals as well as Indian companies. My academics were from hospitality, but I fairly quickly moved into learning and development, and from there moved into HR, spruced up my credentials, acquired an MBA in HR. For a better part of my career, was working for the world's premier HR consulting and services company, which changed its names from being Hewitt Associates to Aon Hewitt to becoming Allied. And eventually, when I left that company, it was a subsidiary of Wipro Limited. So it's been a fascinating journey. I've done roles that are talent, learning, generalist, HR, advisory, recruiting, and I've had the privilege of working across continents. So I've worked in the US, in the Middle East, of course, in India. And it's been fascinating. I love my job and I've loved my career, the way it's shaped out. And quite frankly, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with leaders like yourselves who've been great to work with and for. And that makes work a delight to be. That's the way I would sum it up.
So, Rohit, rich, time does fly, and 20 years, has probably just flown by, and you've already been across various continents. And Rohit, in your experience that you've been working with Indian companies, with multinationals, with corporations that are the largest in the world, and in different geographies, you would have experienced I'm just generalizing here, experience different cultures just because of the geographies that are there, right? In different parts of the world.
Correct.
And does that have a play in the way the corporations culture or policies are in that region? For example, India versus the Middle East versus the US. Does culture play a role over there, Rohit?
Joey, that's a great question. Quite frankly, it's my firm belief that the culture should play a role, but I've seen it play out and underplayed as well, depending upon the stance these companies have taken. Some of the most successful companies have a global culture, which means they are global. They've got some set standards of doing and operating ethos and principles and values and expectations from staff. But they contextualize it to the region and to the culture, which really is a beautiful amalgamation of what's standard and acceptable versus what's to be improvised and made work with, because that's the requirement of that culture. So the successful ones adapt and make it work. The ones who don't adapt and don't go global per se struggle a little bit, and then with their own experiences they start to reframe or reorient themselves. But like I said, I believe that it has to be a global culture, because it isn't one size that fits all. It has to be in the context of the reality of the location or the geography.
True, Rohit. So nice to hear that. And Rohit, if I may just bring up the topic of women and women leaders, workforce for this conversation of ours. In the various cultures and the companies that you worked for, what has been? I'm very keen to just hear an opinion on the way women are treated in the workforce. Do they form a sizable population, or do they form a just as the population of that place might be, or is there a bias towards one side in just terms of the workforce?
Yeah, I want to take a broader perspective and then narrow down on your question. I think women and diversity is an ongoing topic of discussion, and many organization approach it as a target versus looking at it as how do we include women and how do we make their opinions and perspective mainstream in the decision making process of the firm. The fact is, diversity is just counting heads. However, inclusion is making the heads count. And diversity can be purely incidental. Like I've been in HR and I've had the privilege of highly diverse workforce, at least from a gender perspective. So I've had teams where it was 70% women, and several meetings where I was the only guy representing. So underrepresented from the male diversity perspective. But the fact is, the organizations have started doing a reasonably good job in having more women in the workforce. That's partly driven by a strong supply of well-educated, talented women who are available in different fields and streams. The work needs to be still done in making it an inclusive environment. We still have to have more presence at the senior levels, at the levels where they are decision makers, and most of the forward-looking or advanced organizations do have that as a clear objective. It's taken us a while, or as the workplaces of the current and past, as they firmed up and grew, it took them a while to make it a male-dominated culture, and so it will take them a while to bring women to the mainstream and have them get a seat at the table. The changes are positive, the focus is right, the intent has to be sustained and has to grow as we make this move. So it has to start from the topmost leaders. It has to be a part of the culture. It does not have to be just counting numbers. It has to be making the voice heard, making the opinions expressed, and allowing forums where there is an intentional effort.
That's a lot you said, Rohit, and absolutely, just the right approach in my view. And so, given this background, Rohit, as we're transitioning, in the corporates right across, is there some special emphasis or some special effort or some special, task force, etc., that is required for getting more women in leadership positions? That's an objective. That's something where corporations would like to be heading towards in terms of diversity, as you mentioned, just one aspect. Do you think, and hence because of that, some of it will need to be mandated, Rohit? Is that something that may be required in some instances?
So, Joby, I'm never a fan of mandating or forcing things, quite frankly. It has to be fairly organic, and it has to come from the culture that the organization wants to create. If it's a mandate, it can just be a check in the box, and it can be just tracking to numbers, and people will deliver numbers. People will play with numbers, and you get a lot of staff at the entry level roles who could be women. But if women are not given opportunities to grow and come to the decision-making tables, not just representing a number that's a feel-good factor, quite frankly, in my view. Yes, having a number does give a sense of direction or a sense of purpose or a commitment, but that doesn't do it all. It has to be embedded in the process of providing growth, providing careers, providing policies, providing things where, if a woman who's been doing really well in a company goes through the life situations or the life changes, becomes a mother, becomes a wife, has to move some priorities in her personal space, the firm has to be supportive of supporting those priorities in the realities that exist for that woman at that point in time. And that is a hard part, because often we are driven by deadlines, timelines, deliverables, clients, and some of these things, which, if they are only corporate initiatives, they just take a back seat because people find excuses to get past them. So yes, starting to set direction to have this as a priority, but building it as a part of the culture. And more women become a part of the company and are at decision making tables, they will represent the voice and it will drive a culture change.
So, Rohit, in terms of there are different industries even within a geography. Some will have a larger workforce and representation of from in everything, including gender. Now,
Right.
in the areas that you have worked in, have you seen a larger representation of women and hence women leaders also, as compared to the rest? I'm generalizing here. India, as compared to other industries, would you?
You know, yeah, that's a good question. And my quite frankly, my experience is limited to the services industry. And in the services industry, we definitely have an edge. Most jobs are, based on the digital economies, and they are capable of being done from anywhere. Quite frankly, and this new normal of COVID has actually demonstrated that very aptly. So services industries have an edge, but despite the edge, the execution of making women's voice mainstream is still very different in different companies that you'd move around from, even though they are in the services sector. So I've seen representation of anywhere from 20% women in the workforce, going all the way up to 60% women in the workforce in the same industry. Now, and the performance is perhaps better for where women are represented well. So that's something that differs, and I'll always go back to that's largely driven by the culture. I've personally worked with and for very strong, very dedicated, very ambitious women leaders who bring in the edge of empathy and care, which is very natural. And I'm being perhaps a little biased towards the other gender in this situation, and not to say that men are not empathetic and are not sensitive, but the fact is there's something that is an innate trait for women and comes very easily, especially in my industry, which is HR. It's heavily dominated by women, and rightly so, because human resources is the only function that has human in it. So that human aspect to be present in your decision making process when it's related to people is critical. So services industries do have an edge of bringing in women and providing a culture or an environment which is conducive to their growth, development, and contributing to the companies.
Rohit, as just to wind up, would you have any advice or anything to share with, women workforce? I'm just using a very general term here, in terms of what they could be looking at to, move into leadership positions. Very generic. I'm not trying to be very specific here. In terms of moving up the corporate ladder, what are some things that they should or they could keep in mind as they, work through their corporate life, Rohit?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story which is very personal to me. I grew up in a very middle class household. My dad was a banker, and my mom was a homemaker. A typical homemaker would focus, and this is like 70s and 80s, and you'd see women play that role. Pretty much eight out of 10 households. But I think she had something in her which always excited her to do more beyond taking care of us as kids, sending us to school, making sure we were studying and focused in our life. She wanted to be a contributor to the household, and she was entrepreneurial, so entrepreneurial that she took risks in her life. With her own savings, she had a kindergarten opened for teaching young kids. She had a lifestyle boutique opened at some point in time, and she actually continued to study. She did her post graduation, her masters, her bachelor's in education. And while, I mean, this is distinct memory that I have, because I was grown up enough to know that she's studying. And that I want to bring back to women in careers now. I think you've got to take charge of your career. Make it a priority. I'm not saying don't make your family a priority. Absolutely, your family is a big priority, but your career has to be an equally important priority. For that to be successful and happening, you've got to make sure that you're committed equally to both. And if you're not ready for that leap, if you're not ready to stretch your means or stretch your time and other things, then take a break. Then give yourselves time, because if there is something else which is a bigger priority that needs to be focused at, you should make time for that. And for that, I have another story. My wife, who'd been a career woman for almost 20 years, 2 years ago, I was in jobs where I was traveling pretty much 25 out of 30 days in a month. I have two girls. One of them is already in high school, and the other one is soon to be in high school, and their needs were becoming extremely important for us. So my wife decided that she wanted to take a career break. She said, I want to focus on the girls for a few years. These are critical years for them, and this is my decision. Now, that decision is a tough decision. She was at the peak of her career journey. She was looking at a promotion in the next month or 30 days. And she had just had a conversation with her manager. It was not me deciding for her, but she took charge of her situation or our situation, took a decision which was related to her career. She knew that she's going to perhaps lose a lot of things on the professional front, but that to her was the right decision. And I'm sure when she's ready to go back, she'd be raring to go back, and she'll do extremely well, because the one thing that is reflected in this is she's decisive. She's taken charge of her destiny and has not let the environment take charge of her surroundings. So that's what women leaders have to, or women employees have to think about. What's the most important thing for me? What is it that I want to personally achieve right now or in future or a few years from now? The fortunate part of our Indian economy is it's continuing to grow. It is continuing to sustain itself, and it will rebound faster than most economies in the world post COVID. So there is never going to be a dearth of opportunities, whether it is for men or women. It's just that we've got to make sure that both genders are taking charge of their destiny and not just depending upon circumstances and surroundings to drive their decisions.
Rohit, it was really delightful to hear about, your mother, your wife, and, I'm sure your two lovely daughters are going to have a lovely upbringing given, such an environment. So, it was nice to hear that. And for words of encouragement and advice to the newer generation in the workforce, and for all the other things that we spoke about, Rohit, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, for taking out some time from a busy schedule, very busy schedule, Rohit, for this conversation. Thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure, Joby, and I'm thankful for you to provide me this opportunity. And these are personally my beliefs and points of view. I'm not saying this is the only point of view. People have a perspective, and this was just my simple take on how women should look at their careers and their situation at the workplace. Women are the soul of firms. Women bring empathy and strong emotional leadership to the firms, which are extremely important in today's workforce, because a whole lot changes overnight. And what better than this year telling us that your world could be upside down in a few weeks? So thanks a lot for offering this opportunity to me to speak.